Welcome to Powercoat Music. Today we're going to talk about the Tascam DP-24 digital Portastudio and recording keyboards and sound modules. It's hard to find a home studio today that at the very least doesn't have a keyboard synthesizer of some sort. Now, in many home studios, that keyboard synth is either the central sound source or a controller for one that is used to emulate other instruments. Recording synthesizers and sound modules traditionally consist of connecting the direct outputs of those units directly into a mixing console and or multi-track recorder, and then setting the recording levels, and poof, you're done, right? Well, this can be a fairly straightforward process that doesn't require a lot of time and patience, and the DP-24 can be most accommodating in that scenario. But, and this is a big but, are you always getting the best possible synthesizer and sound module recordings that way? Well, are you? Really? How do you prevent those tracks from always sounding dull, predictable, and or replicated, because many keyboard tracks can tend to sound that way? In this video, we're going to cover three primary topics. The first is going to be establishing the objective for your keyboard and or sound module tracks for planning your recording session. The second is the importance of instrument key ranges. The third is various ways you can record your synthesizer and sound module tracks using the DP-24. So grab your coffee, your tea, sit back and relax, and stay with me. This should be both fun and interesting. So let's move on to setting the objective for your keyboard tracks. The first thing you need to decide before recording any keyboard or sound module tracks is, what is that track's primary purpose? The reason why this is important is because it can determine if the track is going to be mono or stereo. This affects the planning regarding your recording session with the DP-24, because tracks 13-14 to tracks 23-24 are stereo tracks on the unit. Stereo tracks are always recorded simultaneously, and you cannot record a single track to a stereo track pair. This is important to keep in mind. So let's move on to assigning stereo tracks. First, when the recorder is stopped, press the Assign button to open the Assign screen. Use the Select button of each track or the cursor buttons to move the cursor to the stereo track you want to assign a recording source to. Press the Source button of the desired input, that is input A through H, or turn the jog data dial to set the input source of each track. After making the settings, press the Assign button or the Home button to return to the home screen. Now here's a point of note. On the DP-32, you can set tracks 9 and 10 through tracks 31 and 32 to be used as either stereo or mono tracks. But by default on the DP-32, those are all set to stereo tracks. Now on the DP-24, back to the DP-24, tracks 1 through 12 are mono tracks. On the DP-32, tracks 1 through 8 are mono tracks. It's the difference between the two units. Now let's talk about assigning mono tracks. While the DP-24 is stopped, press the Assign button to open the Assign screen. Use the Select button of each track or the cursor buttons to move the cursor to the mono track you want to assign a recording source to. Press the Source button of the desired input, that is A through H, or turn the jog data dial to set the input source of each mono track. Now for instance, if you're recording a saxophone track using your synthesizer or sound module to the DP-24, consider routing that sample to only one of that unit's stereo pair. Then record the track as an assigned mono track to the DP-24. Refer to your sound source's owner's manual for instructions on how to route specific sounds to specific outputs. Now here's a point of note. If you wanted to record a keyboard saxophone patch that includes a type of stereo effect, then assign it to a stereo track that is on the DP-24, either 1314 through 2324, and use that sound source's stereo output pair. Let's move on to instrument key ranges. With keyboards and sound modules, one thing that is very important when trying to simulate an acoustic instrument is key range. All musical instruments have some form of key range, and many are specific. For instance, we know that stringed instruments have a defined bottom end, which is of course the lowest open string. The top end is defined by the highest frettable note on the neck of the instrument. It's pretty straightforward. But woodwinds in particular have range limitations. They relate to how long the instrument is and its key configuration. The upper limits are also dependent on the specific player's skill level. Sampled instrument tracks that largely stray outside of an instrument's key range is sometimes noticed by listeners. Now, it can often invoke that annoying question of, what sound was that? At the very least, this negatively affects the authenticity of a song's arrangement. Now, that's why it's important to pay attention to an instrument's key range and stay within them whenever and wherever possible. This should never be overlooked if you're trying to create realistic arrangements using a synthesizer and/or sound module when recording your songs. Let's talk about the various keyboard and sound module recording solutions using the DP-24. There are three basic ways to record your keyboard or sound module with the Tascam DP-24. These are, and here's number one, recording direct. This is the most common and normal way of doing this. We talked about it in the beginning of the presentation. Most units have stereo output, which are generally 2/4 inch plugs. The most simple, again, and basic way to record these devices is to connect them directly to a mixing console and our multi-track recorder using, the mixing console or multi-track recorder's line or instrument inputs. Many keyboard and sound module manufacturers suggest turning the volume units to maximum in this regard, and afterwards adjusting the recording levels on the DP-24 accordingly. That's what I do. Recording direct is the #1 way to get the cleanest, noise-free signal with less distortion. Remember, the less devices you have in your signal chain, the better. Let's move on to number 2, which is recording using an amplifier. If you're using a synthesizer or sound module to emulate a guitar or bass, for example, then try recording like one. First, connect your sound source directly to a guitar or bass amplifier. Connect a dynamic or condenser microphone, this is usually best in this scenario, to the DP-24 and use that to record the guitar or bass amplifier. Now, experiment with the placement of the microphones in front of the amplifier for the best and/or desired sound through the DP-24. You have to play with that. Another alternative in this realm is to use a keyboard amplifier in general to record your sound module or keyboard. Many professional producers and sound engineers use this technique to obtain what they consider to be bigger and fatter keyboard sounds. Now, amplifiers can produce deeper sound in some cases, but the cost is some sonic integrity. Keep that in mind. The third, but not least, solution is using a preamp. The right preamp can warm up your keyboard samples and make them feel more real. Again, many producers that is, professional producers and sound engineers use preamps and are convinced that this makes their keyboard sounds even better. Now, to do this, first connect the sound source to the preamp in. Adjust the preamp settings accordingly, and then connect the preamp out to the DP-24's inputs. This is important. All preamps are not created equal. Each brand and model has its own unique color and personality. That has to do with whatever sound's coming into it. It really has its own personality. So experiment. You have to experiment to find out which units work best for you to enhance your sound. So the results can include deeper bass, rich highs, and it may add a fat or analog enhancement to your sound if that's what you're looking for. A cost associated with this solution is the loss of some sonic integrity. So don't go cheap when it comes to your preamps. And finally, here's some points of note. Don't compress your synthesizer or sound module sounds when recording to the DP-24. This can sometimes negatively affect the dynamics of samples on a track. When emulating acoustic instruments such as a guitar or saxophone, using your keyboard, record it dry first and then add effects later. Experiment with this process for more control and flexibility in your final mixdowns. Now, whenever possible, use good quality cables. I can't stress this enough. The question is, why buy professional grade sound sources and multi-track recorders and then sacrifice that sound to noisy and cheap connections? That just doesn't make sense. But the bottom line here with all of this is remember to be patient, experiment, and just have fun. Well, that is a wrap. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up. Click the subscribe button on your screen right now and join our group. We have new videos coming out every 7 to 10 days, and we would love to have you be a part of our team. Leave a comment in the comment section below, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. While you're here, listen to the music, check out some of the other videos, and let us know what you think about that too. Thank you so much for stopping by. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you soon.